Nebraska men's basketball has been on a tear. After losing 6 in a row, they have now torn off the other direction, winning 4 in a row. And we're going to see how long that can keep going. But to break down, especially last night's game, we've got Wilson Moore from the Omaha World-Herald. Wilson, how are you doing this morning? Welcome into Husker Max today.
Thank you for having me, Caleb. I'm doing great.
All right, so that crowd last night, besides booing children wearing Chiefs gear, there was a little bit of juice in the arena, and Nebraska got down, but then Alpha Bryce took back over late in the game. Nebraska started to get to the free throw line, got past 20 free throws, made 18, while Ohio State only shot 15. What was your biggest takeaway, or a couple of takeaways from that game last night for the men to extend that winning streak to 4 games?
I think a big part of it, you mentioned Bryce Williams. Nebraska all season long has gone as he has gone. I think one of the driving factors in this now 4-game winning streak is Bryce Williams has played like a stud in all 4 of those games, really beginning with overtime against Illinois when he took control. And then we saw it again yesterday where there's 4 minutes left. I think the game was tied or close to tied, and Nebraska just had the best player on the floor. Bryce Williams, gets downhill, gets to his little spot like in the paint, easy jumper, gets to the line 2 or 3 times after that. They just had the guy that they knew they wanted to get the ball in the hands of, and he delivered. I think that's been one of the biggest, if not the biggest factor of this 4-game winning streak, is Bryce Williams is back to looking like the guy that we saw in November and December.
Wilson, the thing that I keep going back to the Washington victory and that come from behind victory on the road, and then yesterday as well, there was during that, really the beginning of that losing streak that Nebraska had, Fred talking post game, not about the effort, but the toughness. And I think people had to throw the difference between what he's actually talking about and a lot of those 50-50 opportunities that was just eluding Nebraska, where they were essentially being out-toughed in a lot of those games, especially those close games. Yesterday, it was hard not to notice Nebraska flipping the switch right there. Hard to not notice guys like Andrew Morgan all over the floor and that toughness factor that Fred has talked about. I don't know how much you can coach that, but it seems like if there was a message that Fred was sending during that time, that this team received that message rather successfully.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think guys hit the deck for loose balls like 5 or 6 times last night. Fred said it was the play of the game, the play when Andrew Morgan poked the ball away from Aaron Bradshaw and dove for it, ended up getting rewarded with a layup. Raleigh Wooster went like parallel to the ground at one point to try to save the ball from going out of bounds. I think there was a moment in the first half, Sam Hoiberg, who is listed at a 6 feet even, went up and pulled down a rebound, like among the trees, like not like getting to a loose ball, like he boxed out and got above the 7-footers under the basket to get a rebound. Yeah, and that's just toughness, and that's what this Nebraska team has to be built on. Fred Hoiberg has said it all year long, but especially since like the Creighton game, that this isn't a team that's gonna like outshoot, outskill a whole lot of teams. No, this isn't last year's team that had just 5 3-point shooters on the floor at a given time. They got to get after it on the boards. They got to make the hustle plays. They got to be tougher than other teams. And yeah, they got away from that in January. And I think we've seen them get back to that over the past 4 games.
Up through that 6-game losing streak, Nebraska did not beat a single team as long as the opponent shot at least 40% from deep. And now back-to-back games, the opponent has shot exactly 40% from deep. What are you seeing from this team defensively to take away the 3 and away over the course of the season, but then also offensively be able to handle a team who is shooting good from 3-point range, that they can get back over the hump and, like last night, shot 51% on their own end of the floor?
Yeah, it's tough to I generally try not to attribute things to like the kind of mental intangible side of things, but Fred has talked about how I think it was the Illinois game when Illinois made shots, Nebraska kept guarding, whereas in previous games that, shoulders would slump a little bit, guys would hang their heads, and there'd be kind of a hangover off of these, possessions if they played good defense and still allowed a tough shot. I don't think we see that. And, rebounding is a big thing. I think they've won the glass in the past 3 games. That's huge. Like I said, for a team that's not going to make a ton of threes themselves. And, just if you're going to allow teams to shoot a lot of threes, which as we've seen from Nebraska, they do, that's this team's defense. Opponents are going to shoot 3-pointers. Sometimes they're going to make them, but if you're going to allow them to shoot that many threes, you got to be able to box out and end those possessions, not give them any more chances than they already have. Nebraska's done a good job of that.
Wilson, this win last night doesn't come without obviously some concern, and with Berke Bjiktengel's injury, and that looked pretty nasty. Him being helped off, and as Fred talked about after the game too, that he could definitely miss some time. With Maryland coming in with as big as their front court is too, there's maybe some options there when it comes to a lot of shuffling of the lineup. Even when Berkey was healthy, I started wondering what this lineup might look like for however long Bjiktingel is out. Where would you maybe start to look at guys that are going to maybe have bigger roles, bigger minutes, and obviously having to play a little bit smarter now too, being down one big guy who was really coming into his own too?
Yeah, I think the obvious choice is Braxton Mia, right? He's this guy who started the first 20-something games of the season, didn't play for 2 games, has been back, I wouldn't say in the rotation over the past 3, but has gotten kind of spot minutes in the first half. And I think he's played well against Oregon, against Washington, and against yesterday against Ohio State. I think Nebraska is going to need more from him. He obviously has a very different skill set from Berke. He's not the shooter, he's not the passer Berke is, but he can protect the rim. He can get rebounds. He's a big body. We saw him contribute offensively the other day. He had 5 points in 7 minutes, including hitting some free throws, which were an issue for him early in the season. So I think Braxton Mia is the obvious place you look to. Now, whether that's starting or coming off the bench, that's to be determined. You can make a case for Andrew Morgan starting at the 5. I'm not sure you can play the 2 of them together. I don't think they have this year. I'm just not sure you can get the kind of spacing you need in today's game with the 2 of them on the floor together. But I think those 2 in kind of a timeshare at the center with obviously, more minutes from Mia than we've seen over the past few games, just out of necessity.
Do you think we can get 40 minutes between the 2 of those, and whatever it would be, 25 for Andrew Morgan? It was only 7 minutes last night for Braxton Mia, and it was a really efficient 7 minutes for him. And he played really, really well. I actually think he could have scored more if Berke would have passed him the freaking ball in the paint, but that's its own thing. Can you get 25 and 15, a split on the minutes between those 2 at the 5, or is there going to have to be some time, obviously if there's foul trouble, where you're going to have to go pretty small ball across the lineup against this team on Thursday?
I mean, I think you have to get 40 minutes out of them. I don't know that, maybe there are teams that you can get weird against with, someone, I don't even know, like Jawan Gary at 6'6" at the 5. I don't know that you can do that against anyone in the Big Ten. I'm just spitballing here, but I think especially against Maryland, with as big as that team is, throwing Derek Queen and Julian Reese at teams, I think you need size in there, and I think you need one of those guys on the floor at all times if Berke is out. And I think that goes back to what we were just talking about. Like, you got to play smart. If you're Andrew Morgan or Braxton Mia, you can't pick up 2 fouls in the first 7 minutes. That's just going to put you behind the 8 ball against a team as strong and tough as Maryland.
Offensively, going back to Bryce and what he did, especially in that key stretch there at the end of the first half where you've got 3 guys in foul trouble and all of a sudden that offense is squarely on him. Is there any, as we're in February now, we're reaching the midway point of February, gosh, conference tournament's going to be here before we know it. Is there concern on your part at all, Wilson, that he's taken on too much of that role, that those legs start going out, that jump shot starts to maybe fall a little bit short because he is taking on too much? And if that's the case, in this final stretch before we get to the postseason here, who is, in your opinion, one or even two guys that are going to be those complementary pieces that need to be there every night?
Yeah, I think it's always a concern, not even necessarily for Bryce specifically, but just kind of everyone at this point in the season, Like I remember last year, people were saying just, everyone's banged up this time of year, no one's completely healthy, everyone's tired, everyone's kind of in that final kick, about a month until conference tournament time. So I think that's always just kind of a natural thing. I don't know how much it's a concern for Bryce specifically more than anyone else. But to your other question of complementary pieces, I'll give you two, and they're guys with opposite offensive games. One is Jawan Gary. I think we've seen over the past few games, especially like Washington and Oregon, what he can do as a scorer and the dimension he brings, the toughness of a guy who says, I'm going to get to the basket. I'm going to let people bounce off of me and finish in a kind of unorthodox way off a weird foot at the rim. And the other is Connor Essegian. And Essegian, on a team that so badly needs shooting and has been inconsistent from beyond the arc, Essegian is the guy who can take the lid off the basket. There have been a few games already this year where shots haven't been falling and he's come off the bench, hit a couple threes, and just kind of loosen things up for everybody. And, I think we saw it in the non-con. We haven't quite seen it as much in conference play, just that game where he catches fire and hits 7 3-pointers, but we know, anyone who watches knows Connor Essegian is capable of that. And there's a good chance that on a given night that can happen. So I think, if you figure Bryce Williams has to be Nebraska's constant, then I think those two guys are the guys who can kind of elevate that offense to another level.
This team was looking just a couple of weeks ago at the potential of missing the Big Ten tournament. Now, sitting at 8th in the league, which would give them a bye away from that first day. And they would put them in the 8-9 game. They would take on whoever is the 1 seed when it gets into the Big Ten tournament time, which, by the way, right now would be Purdue. It would be nice to face them not at Mackey Arena. I think everyone in the league
would. It would only be an hour away, though. It'd only be
as long as it's not at Mackey, I feel like everyone is kind of just going to take what they've got. But if you're Nebraska and you finish up at an 8 seed, you have probably over these final 7 games won 4 of them. And that gets you to 20 wins. Wilson, for you, as you look at this team, and there's a lot of the metrics are saying it almost a lock at 19, definitely. For some of them, definitely a lock at 19, but getting to 20, they were to go 4-3 over this last stretch. You completely that more than erases that 6-game losing streak, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's crazy that this team went from, like you said, the conversation was about missing the Big Ten tournament to back on the bubble in like 5 days between that Illinois and that Oregon game. I still can't wrap my head around it. But yeah, I think 19 wins gets Nebraska into the tournament. That's at the end of the regular season, that's 9 wins in Big Ten play. And with how deep this conference is, I think that probably gets you in. I think I think the Big Ten probably sends 9 teams or so to the tournament. And that's, going into this, the stretch on the schedule I kept looking at, after they lost 5 straight, was the one that they're in the middle of right now, beginning with Washington, then Ohio State, Maryland, at Northwestern, at Penn State. I remember looking at that and saying that's 5 games that are all winnable. Will they win all of them? Probably not, because this is the Big Ten and the Big Ten is weird and it's hard to win. It's hard to win every game that's, close to a toss up. But that was the big run that I felt like, when they lost 6 straight, I remember thinking like, for them to have any chance, they need to win all 5 of those. Now, I wasn't banking at the time on them beating Illinois and Oregon, and that kind of changes the complexion of things.
Right.
But I think the general point still stands of like they're now 2 games into it. These next 3 games are all winnable. And for a team that still, needs to just rack up wins and just slowly get out of this hole they dug with the 6-game losing streak. The next 3, I think, are pretty important.
Yeah, and Kaleb brought up what they were doing defensively too, and it just I go back to what Fred was illustrating with this team during their struggles, whether it was the defensive side. We all remember the 3-point percentage from the opposition, that is, but also just going back 2 years ago, Wilson, when we go back to the Derek Walker and Sam Griesel team, of maybe the first time we could all look at a roster and say this wasn't just built for on-court success, but also within the locker room too. And it seems like that formula has continued as far as how he pieces these rosters together year in and year out. Is there a sense of that, in your opinion, during that 6-game losing skid, that, again, you've got a strong locker room, you've got a very even keel coach that is never too high or too low, that is also probably a big factor in them being able to get that much needed win against Illinois and now be able to ride that success, being able to handle the successful moments and also be able to get off the schneid, so to speak?
Yeah, that's kind of how this roster was built, how this roster and last year's roster, where the kind of figureheads from a leadership standpoint were Rink Mast and Josiah Alec.
Mm-hmm.
And now this year, Fred has said a few times just throughout the offseason and throughout the year, they wanted to get old and stay old.
Yeah.
That's how they tried to build this out of the portal, is veteran guys who have been around, who know how to play college basketball, who are smart players, because Nebraska can run a pretty complex offense. So just the other day, Hoiberg said he never felt like guys totally lost it during that streak, like from an emotions standpoint. He never felt like guys were totally down and out mentally. So I think that absolutely has something to do with it.
Wilson, hey, we really appreciate you jumping on Husker Max today, talking a little Husker basketball. And you're not a Chiefs fan, are you?
I'm not. No, I'm.
Yeah, there we go.
My team, if you can see that.
Hey, I know this is a Bears show. We will allow it. We will allow it. You and the Purple People Eaters. Thanks for coming on.
Appreciate it. Yeah, thanks for having me on, guys.